Joining us now to talk through all of this is LaDoris Cordell, a retired California Superior Court judge. She also served as the independent police auditor in San Jose, California. Judge Cordell, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be with you, Joshua.
Let me start with the Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice cases. I wonder what you make of the way that those have ended, particularly settlement payouts, promises of police reforms. This is beginning to feel like a pattern that seems hard to break, but what do you think of this latest iteration of the pattern?
So what has happened, and I think most people are kind of disappointed by this, is that those killings were 6 years apart. And in both of them, there have been no criminal prosecutions for anyone involved in the killings of these two people. So while officers may have been fired, that means disciplined, none of them have been charged with criminally taking the lives of these two young people. One officer has been indicted in the Breonna Taylor case, but not for killing her. Instead, for firing his gun and endangering people in a nearby apartment building. So, what they have in common is that no one has been held criminally responsible. They were unarmed. There is no question about that whatsoever, but yet the system is such that there is no criminal liability. In both of these cases, grand juries were utilized, and in both of those instances, the grand juries came back with no indictments. So there are a lot of similarities. They had payouts. Tamir Rice's settlement was $6 million. Breonna Taylor's was $12 million. And there were police reforms that were put in place. And yet, I just wonder really where we are in all of this, because none of these things seem to deter police from killing unarmed civilians, especially people of color.
Let me ask you about the Minneapolis case. Here is part of what Minneapolis's police chief said about what happened this week, what apparently happened this week during the traffic stop.
Clearly, at least from my view of the video and the preliminary information that also mentioned that a witness saw the individual fire first at the officers, my officers were reacting to that deadly threat. And so, again, that's the investigation will uncover more details. But if the question is, should the officers not react in a deadly force situation, and knowing that community members' lives were at stake as well, the officers are trained to protect community members' lives and their own.
Judge Cordell, what about that? I understand the tension between improving law enforcement and also making sure that officers have the latitude to fire when they are fired upon. I have law enforcement in my family, and I would like to see him come home after every shift, particularly if he faces a deadly threat. How do we strike that balance?
Well, officers have every right to defend themselves. So that's really a non-issue. If someone is fired on an officer has a right to shoot back. So the key issue is, one, in the Minneapolis case, was there in fact the shooting by the person who was eventually killed? And that's why body cameras are important. And it's also important that some of the video can be edited. You have to be sure that everything is shown. So yes, officers have a right to defend. And in fact, that was used in the Breonna Taylor case. They maintained that even though they went in, no-knock warrant, and found nothing in there, the young man who was justified, and I say that in quotes, justified the officers firing 32 shots right into that house, 6 of them hitting Breonna Taylor and killing her. So the officers have a right to defend themselves. But again, the issue is, were shots fired, and was self-defense really a legitimate defense?
Are we making any progress with improving the nature of policing in this country? We went through a half year with a very intense summer of protests in New York, all over the country, all over the world, really. And I wonder what we got out of 2020. In your assessment, what did 2020 do for us in terms of improving law enforcement in this country, if anything?
Sure. What we got were reforms. And in my view, reforms are the quick fixes. These are the Band-Aids. These are things that try to keep people safe when they interact with the police, like no chokeholds, no carotid restraints, having some civilian oversight. But the key is, do these things deter officers from using excessive force on unarmed civilians? And from what we've seen, those killings continue. So reforms, and I don't want to take anything away from those community activists who have made good trouble and gotten these reforms, these quick fixes, but there has to be a deeper dive. We have got to completely reimagine policing and talk about what it is we really want police to do. Understand that police have most of their interactions with people through traffic stops. And the Supreme Court has allowed pretext stops, meaning you can stop someone for a minor traffic violation like dirt on your license plate light. And the officer's not interested in that. But it justifies an officer getting more into who is driving the car. And that's how a lot of these things take place in terms of the shootings by police. So we need to reimagine. We need to think, do we really need officers to continue to make traffic stops? Or should we do what they're starting to do in Berkeley, California, utilizing a civilian force to initiate traffic stops? So there needs to be, I think, more thinking about police officers. If they live in the community, they're more likely not to be seen as outsiders and us against them. So there are residency issues. So again, reforms are fine, but I think we need to take a deeper dive and look more at this whole big picture of what policing should look like in America.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.